So I think there's no doubt that if you're Iran and you're seeing the havoc that has been caused by one event on October the 7th, then you'd be very tempted to try and help another organization not dissimilar to Hamas, like Hezbollah, to do something on an even bigger scale, because they may feel this is their chance to do what they've always wanted to do, which is just obliterate Israel. And that's, of course, what's at the heart of Israel's fear about all this. And a lot of the, I remember interviewing Netanyahu in Jerusalem for CNN about 10, 11 years ago.
Piers Morgan is going to dive into the Israel-Palestine conflict with emotional anecdote and bold critiques, balancing sympathy for Israel's fear with sharp takes on Hamas and Netanyahu alike. But my question is he offering honest insight or juggling double standards? Either way, his analysis is as layered as it is polarizing. My name's Z. Welcome to Z's Political Couch. Let's unpack it.
And the two things that he did, which really interested me in terms of the psychology. He took me to a picture of his brother, who was a captain in the Israeli forces who died in the raid on Entebbe. And he started crying as he showed me the picture. So that just showed me that everyone involved in this, a bit like with Northern Ireland, it's so deep-rooted, it's so personal. Everyone's got a personal story like this at some stage of what's been going on in the history of Israel and Palestine. But secondly, he took me to a map behind his desk, which is a really interesting visual, this. And he went, watch this. And he took his hand and he put it on Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. He went around all the big Arab countries around Israel with his hand. And then he took his thumb and he put it on Israel to show the scale of how tiny Israel is surrounded by these enormous Arab countries. It was a powerful thing. I remember joking to him, saying, do you wish you'd been put somewhere else? And he went, well, like where? I went, I don't know, Belgium? I mean, it was a very powerful visual. Now, Israel is obviously incredibly well armed. It's obviously helped in that by the United States, as an extremely powerful ally. But this has, I think, made all Israelis, and I think this is a really important point to make as well about the general overview, it's made them very fearful. Mm-hmm. The scale of what went on, as like I say, nearly 7,000 people were attacked. 1,200 were killed in the most barbaric, brutal manner. And these were in peace-loving areas where a lot of the people there were trying to help Palestinians. So if you look at it in the Israeli context of what the people there feel, they must feel very fearful. Just as a lot of people in Gaza feel very fearful. All the people in Gaza probably feel very fearful. So that's what I mean again about this is a very complex story. And if you try and have a simple or simplistic view, I think you are, well, it must be comforting to you to do that, but it's not the right way to approach this story. It's too complicated.
And there's also one with what the United States does with it, with this situation, because on the one hand, you have Israel, longtime allies and partners. On the other hand, you've signed the Abraham Accords. And also you're reliant on a lot of these Arab countries for oil. So it's not as simple as like, we're all in with the Israelis, because you can't alienate them for business reasons and also because you need them.
I mean, the most significant thing to me is how inactive and quiet Saudi Arabia has been. And if you notice that, they've said very little. Saudi Arabia wants normalization of relations with Israel. They've seen the way it's gone with some of the other countries in the region, and Saudi Arabia knows the oil's running out and they're going to have to rely on tourism and entertainment and sport and these other things. And to do that, they're going to have to open up and they're going to have a better relationship with countries like Israel. They know that. Israel knows that. There's no will for that to be stopped. But of course, what has been going on makes it very difficult for Saudi leaders with the Muslim population to now say, right, now we're going to get into business bed with Israel. It's very difficult. So again, I come back to what I said. These are morally complex issues, and how these big superpowers now play this out is going to be absolutely crucial to the long-term future of the region.
One of the interesting things you raised there, Piers, is the Israeli position, or maybe the Netanyahu position of, we're going to eliminate Hamas. Do you think that was ever possible?
No.
And do you think that it was, maybe you could argue it was possible if they nuked Gaza. But apart from that, how do you even fight a terrorist group? Somebody made this very powerful point. I don't even know, may even have been on your show, about the fact that, I have family in Ukraine. A lot of people, when there's bombing, go and hide in tube tunnels and all sorts of other tunnels, underground bunkers, etc. We know that that is not what's happening in Gaza. The civilians don't have access to the biggest network of tunnels ever. So you've got a population that is being used in this way, essentially as a human shield. Hamas have said,
and the leaders of Hamas, the billionaires who run it, are all living in Qatar, right?
in five-star hotels.
Right. So they've done nothing for the people of Gaza. Let's be clear. And they've run a pretty despotic regime since they took power in 2005. I don't think that there can be any future for Gaza that involves Hamas having any leadership at all or be part of any government. That's my own view. I don't think there can be any future for Netanyahu or the more right-wing genocidal talking members of his cabinet. I think they've all got to go too. It reminds me a bit of Northern Ireland, when ultimately...
I don't know. In essence, I mean, Morgan's analysis contains important truths. His uneven application of critique, holding Hamas accountable for atrocities while downplaying or justifying Israel's excesses, highlights double standards. His insights into leadership, human rights, and geopolitical complexities are valuable, no doubt. But a truly balanced perspective would demand equally rigorous scrutiny of all parties involved.
Again, you had terrorists living in civilian population. The British response to that was not to go and unload 2,000-pound bombs on Belfast, right? Because we recognise that they're not exactly the same, but the principle's interesting to explore.
Just for context, I think it would be relevant. Your point about 7,000 people, 1,200 killed and others wounded. If you take that in the British context, that would be about 35,000.
Right. So imagine 35,000 people being attacked in Britain by people in Northern Ireland. Say the IRA had done that. They wouldn't have done, but say they had, right? What would have been the pressure from the British people to go and eradicate
what
the
would
IRA?
Thatcher have done, let's say?
Right. It would have been a very, big test of any prime minister. So I don't underestimate that at all. And there would be a fundamental duty of a British government to defend itself and defend its people from any further attacks of that nature, of course. And if the IRA were then, to extrapolate the analogy, if they were living as they were amongst civilians, what do you do? How do you get rid of them? Ultimately, you couldn't get rid of them. And ultimately, it had to be a political settlement, which it will have to be with Palestine and Israel. There will have to be a political solution. But if you ask most Israelis right now, how do you feel about a two-state solution? I would imagine almost all of them would say no thanks, because we can't live in terror. But I would say back to them, you're never going to get rid of this problem until every Palestinian has the same human rights that you do, right? They have to have the same rights as you. And if they don't, why shouldn't they? Explain to me why they don't have the same rights. Explain to me when this all started and Israel's first response was to turn off the energy and the water and the food supplies into Gaza. Right there, you had evidence of the occupation, as the critics of Israel have called this for many decades, that when you have a power like Israel that has the ability to turn off large swathes of energy and water into another country, right? That is a form of occupation. Whether they want to call it that or not, that cannot be sustainable going forward. You've got to offer people in Palestine equal rights. You've got to give them a chance to self-govern properly, not being run by a terror group, but by people who are more moderate, as we found in Northern Ireland. You've got to have big leaders who come forward who genuinely want peace. I don't think Hamas want peace. I don't think Netanyahu wants peace. He showed no sign of wanting to actually have a peace settlement to this in his entire tenure as Prime Minister. So I think you need clear new leadership to sort this out.
Do you think that the Northern Ireland example, just maybe this is a sad thing to say out loud, but sometimes in these terrible situations, people have to get tired of killing each other and they're just not?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of happened in Northern Ireland.
That's what I mean. But it took...
And to be clear, there were very bad people on both sides of Northern Ireland. A lot of the loyalist terrorists were just as despicable as IRA terrorists. Terrorism is terrorism, whoever's perpetrating it. But in the end, it was Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, John Major, George Mitchell, all these big figures managed to get through it and got to peace when a lot of people thought it was impossible. When the IRA were blowing everybody up all the time, people thought you never do peace with these people. You end up with Sinn Féin as the dominant party in Northern Ireland. Who would have thought that 30 years ago? Would have been unthinkable. You know, the Queen ended up having to shake hands with Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, right? The people who had been part of the organization which had murdered some of her own family, right? But ultimately, she recognized this was what she had to do. That's statesmanship, that's leadership. Now, what do you do here? I think you've got to get new leaders in. I mean, I really do, on both sides, and fast.
And bringing it closer to home, one of the things I think this conflict has also revealed is the splits within our own societies here in the UK, in the United States, all over the West, frankly. What have you made of what we've seen on the streets of this country, in the media, in the commentary, just how our body politic has reacted to this?
I think you're seeing a lot of young people in particular falling for a lot of disinformation spewed by things like TikTok. Yeah, TikTok is now the #1 news source for people under 24 in the world, right? I think a lot of when you see these interviews with some of these young people taking part in protest marches at universities in America or here, and you ask them about the conflict, they don't seem to know very much.
Yeah, we did one on trigonometry.
I saw it.
Yeah,
it was fantastically enlightening, because they didn't really know what they were doing or what the history was or anything. You know, I read a very good piece by Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian. He's a Jewish columnist. And he wrote a very good piece early on saying, you know, I could construct a very good argument for both sides to have a very good cause to be the real victim here in this whole conflict, going back to 1948. You know, and it was a very interesting piece where I thought that we need more of that, more of an acknowledgement that actually this is incredibly complicated, and you can construct an argument for Israel and why they've had to go through 75 years of hell. You can construct exactly as powerful an argument for the Palestinians and why they have. And it's pretty similar to what was going on in Northern Ireland. So ultimately, you've got to get people that can barrel through that and get to resolution. It's incredibly difficult. And I don't really see many leaders out there that can do it. Oddly, Trump might be one of them. You know, in his normal kind of brutal way, actually, you know, he can be quite effective in this kind of thing. It'd be very interesting what he does, both with here and with Ukraine.
As we wrap it up here today, it's almost obvious Piers Morgan's commentary is a mix of undeniable truths, selective framing, and let's be honest, a dash of classic Piers double standards. While he rightfully calls out the need for fresh leadership and equality, his narrative often leans into oversimplification and at times questionable parallels. Piers has a knack for steering the pot, but he is genuinely seeking clarity, or just playing to the step gallery. That's for you to decide. What's clear is that his takes, while compelling, often sidesteps deeper accountability for all sides, leaving us with more questions than answers. Thanks for joining me on Z's Political Couch. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and remember, don't just sit on the couch. Be sure to own it. Bye for now.